Kate Willard is the government's Thames Estuary Envoy and chair of the Estuary Growth Board, which brings together stakeholders across the area to deliver a green-blue action plan. So, Kate, the Thames Gateway was a sort of government project first in the days of Tony Blair, but that never really fulfilled its potential. So, what's different about Thames Estuary?
So I think whatever you call it, let's be clear about the geography that we're looking at in the first place. And if I was kind of describe it in this way, if you're standing with your back to the City of London, although the City of London Corporation absolutely see themselves as part of the estuary, imagine you're standing there and you're kind of looking east. We reach out to Southend on the Essex coast and out to Margate on the Kent coast. And obviously our lifeblood, the river itself, coursing through the centre. So it's always been a kind of a coherent economic geography, that landscape, recognised over kind of many years. And I think where we've had the challenges with it in the past has been that there hasn't necessarily been that buy-in, which has said the sum of the parts is greater than the individual parts, therefore, or there's been lack of buy-in to that concept that the sum of the parts is greater than the individual parts. Therefore, people have focused on their own territories, their own patches. And I think that's probably true as much for businesses as it is for some of the politicians and local leaders. I think so you've always had something which is sort of, it's coherent in one sense, but nobody could almost be kind of sort of asked to pull together and turn it into a coherent reality. The difference we've got this time, which is absolutely great, is that the leaders, the businesses as well, but really importantly this time, the leaders from South Essex, from North Kent and from East London have realised that delivering something at an estuary-wide level genuinely does add value to their more local territories and domains. And I'll give you an example. If we think about the hydrogen agenda, you can't have a hydrogen strategy for Canvey Island or a hydrogen strategy for Margate. You need a hydrogen strategy over a larger territory. And I think with that approach and with the understanding that there is benefit in looking at that broader canvas, we've got the political buy-in. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to give you a brief anecdote, because I think this for me is really, really important. It's a very simple one, but it was a very important one. When I was recruited, which was in November 2019, on my panel, the recruitment panel, there was a politician from South Essex, there was a politician from East London, a politician from North Kent, and it was very clearly South Essex was represented, North Kent was represented, and East London was represented. Because my politicians were already there when I was appointed as chair and envoy. When I started to recruit the private sector members in spring of 2020, I went to the board and I said, I need some of you to be on the recruitment panel with me for these new private sector members. And do I need to have one of you from South Essex and one of you from East London and one of you from North Kent? And as one, that board said, no, Kate, bugger that, with the Thames Estuary Growth Board. And at that moment, I knew that actually those politicians had come together as an estuary body. And so I think really simply, the reason why it has failed historically is because there has been fragmentation, has kind of trumped cohesion. And what we've got now, in part because of the things that we're doing, and I think the approach that we're taking, is that cohesion is top trumping fragmentation. And that is the single most important thing for me in terms of that board at the moment, is continuing to make people understand, feel part of the benefits of working together across the estuary.
Very good. So you say that you are going to do more than talking and going to get stuff done, and clearly it's great you've got people together like that now. So, but how are you actually going to change things in the area?
So I think our approach, there's a couple of things there in our approach. I am a great believer in getting stuff done, in kind of rolling your sleeves up and getting stuff done. So what I will never be doing is sending you huge phone book. So young people don't know what a phone book is anymore, do they? But you know what I mean? Like huge swathes of information, you know, a thought leadership piece on the importance of, I don't know, bloody green, blue growth or whatever. That's not what we are. We are, as a private public board, we are very driven by, we have a kind of very private sector ethos, I suppose. And I mean that in the best of all ways, not the worst of all ways, which means that we are about making change, making desirous change, delivering investment, accelerating investment. When we see a problem, solving it, and we see an opportunity, capitalizing on it. So I'll go back to hydrogen again, because it's just quite a good example. You know, we could pontificate about hydrogen, couldn't we, for a long time? Hydrogen is still clearly, you know, quite a new technology. It's emerging thinking. There's lots of stuff going on in that sector, and we could be part of that thinking around the hydrogen agenda. Or we could make the decision, do you know what, the estuary needs a hydrogen ecosystem. It does. We know that. We are very comfortable with making that presumption. So let's commission a hydrogen investment strategy. And I'll talk about this a bit, because the investment strategy approach is absolutely fundamental to who we are. And again, I'll return to that in a second. But so the piece of work we've commissioned on hydrogen, working with some extraordinary, the extraordinary team at Ikigai, is looking at what is the hydrogen picture across the estuary. And from that, I mean supply, demand, production, fueling, transportation, storage. What are the opportunities there? And then where is the private sector investment? Because we know that it's a technology and a fuel and energy source that investors are interested in. So what we will have at the end of this, and we're about half of the way through this huge piece of work at the moment, is the identification of the ecosystem. And what is emerging are clusters where you've got the match of supply and demand and usage in clusters. Some related to the Freeport, potentially. So you've got these clusters. What that enables us then to do is not to go to government and say, we want to build a hydrogen production facility, please can we have a grant? It will enable us to go to government, because we've started, our starting point is working with investors, is to go to government and say, here's the map for the delivery of a hydrogen ecosystem across the estuary. It's going to cost X billion. Here's the X billion minus Y, which is already there on the table from the private sector. Government, you just need to invest Y, and actually some of that will be investment. Sometimes it might be something to do with, for example, price fixing around hydrogen. It might be a mechanism rather than a grant. By doing that, you're de-risking government's investment, you're keeping government's investment to the minimum, you're accelerating private sector investment, and you're also de-risking the private sector investment, because there's a strategy behind the whole as well, and it's got government backing. So I think our approach to spot investment opportunities and then to do something about that in a very, very practical way is evidence of the fact that we're not just thinking about stuff, we're making sure that stuff gets done. We've also got some very clear measurements for success. So you can see we've just published our work plan. We're talking about doing this, and we will measure it by looking at those indices or whatever. So, because I think you have to be measured. I don't think you can just say, oh, it's all terribly marvelous what we're doing, and then not expect to be held to account. So we will expect that as well. We're also, and this comes back to the how will you get stuff done. I spent quite a lot of last year talking about what we weren't, because when I was first appointed, people say, oh, so you're a bit like the Northern Powerhouse, but, you know, down south. Well, no, you know, the Northern Powerhouse is a philosophical construct, isn't it? You know, Newcastle bloody hates Liverpool. So it's kind of, it wasn't that. Were you a Midlands engine? No. Are you a LEP? Absolutely not. Are you a development corporation? No, perish the thought. So it became very frustrating to talk about what we weren't, and then we needed to talk about what we are. So we are developing a model working with the private sector, with investors, and with government, which is called the Strategic Investment Partner. So the SIP, Strategic Investment Partner model. And that model is exactly as I have just described to you. It is about investment propositions. It's about securing and coalescing the private sector investment, and then bringing the government mechanism in to unlock that. I think that model will emerge over time for us to be a practical investor ourselves. I expect us to be holding funds over time, but we are emerging this model, and I think it's quite interesting, because you could use that mechanism, and again, it's really important that we are delivering on an estuary wide level. So we don't we won't be investing in, you know, at a local authority level, because that's not our job. That's a local authority's job. And it's very important that we don't irritate people by trying to duplicate what others are doing. So we keep our eye very, very clearly on that estuary-wide horizon. But I think that emerging model, which is an investment model, I think the continued ethos of our, not just our private sector board members, but our public sector board members, who, I think, going back to that point about them buying in this time round, one of the reasons they bought in this time round is because they can actually see stuff happening. They can see the benefits of it. And I think, therefore, our ability to continue to deliver will continue to be important, because it will keep that buy-in. And so there's a sort of symbiotic relationship there between what we actually do and who wants to still hang out with us.
So one of the bits of stuff that has happened really is the agreement around Thames Freeport, which of course you campaigned for, and that's a big win. But what are the actual benefits it's going to bring to the area?
So I think you can sort of look at this through two lenses, really. The Freeport brings a huge lot of opportunity for the businesses involved. So particularly for DP, for Tilbury, for Ford, for Thames Enterprise Park, it will help those businesses to grow and to develop and evolve and to increase international trade and reach and all those sorts of things. So that's good news, because that's growth, isn't it? That's good new jobs, those kinds of things. I think within those business clusters, the Freeport provides the opportunity to develop the work of ports and logistics in a green way. So to be looking at the greening of freight and logistics, which is incredibly important. And you can already immediately see a synergy there with our hydrogen work, can't you? Because if we're going to green Tilbury and DP, particularly the trucks coming in and out of them, we need that hydrogen in there. So there's a direct relationship there. So I think there's something about those businesses, something about the greening of freight and logistics, but there is a broader estuary-wide piece, and that's the piece that I suppose we will keep a watching brief on. You know, those ports don't need us to help them build their businesses, but we can keep that estuary-wide piece. So I think that's about skills, about making sure those great new jobs that the Freeport will deliver, very highly skilled, a number of them, that those are able to residents in the estuary, that therefore we're thinking about that. We're thinking about as well, again, we try and sort of do multi-layered thinking. So how can we make sure that high-level skills and those jobs are accessible, particularly to some of the communities who are in need of, and to use government hideous jargon, the kind of levelling up agenda, those communities who are deprived, suffering from poverty, social exclusion, can access those skills and those good quality jobs. I think there's something about the Freeport continuing to help build the brand of the estuary on the international market, which will be a benefit to the estuary, broadly speaking, in terms of inward investors, in terms of the export model. So I think there's a kind of, there's the direct business benefit, but I think there's that broader estuary-wide piece, and that's the piece we'll be keeping a close watch on, to make sure that because you don't want to dilute the offer, so it's not about diluting the Freeport, but that we, without diluting it, make sure the benefits are spread as widely as is possible.
And I guess connected to that, I mean, you're looking at how the Thames can be better used for freight, particularly light freight, moving it off London's roads to ease congestion and air pollution. So what will a busy future river look like, do you think? And what sorts of goods and services will it accommodate and take off the roads?
Yeah, so I think you're right. We want to look back at, if I think about what would I want to see in sort of, 10 years time looking back, and obviously our timeline is through to 2050. So we can take quite a nice long view, which is great because of the 2050 Growth Commission, our sort of our parental launching body. So I think a busy river looks like this. Importantly, it looks busy but clean. So there's very little point taking stuff off dirty trucks and putting them onto dirty vessels. So that hydrogen agenda again, but also the dual fueling, electrification of vessels on the river. So it'll look clean would be the first thing I'd say about that river. I think it will look busy. It will look busy with stuff and with people. So, and by stuff, I don't just mean the sort of your heavy aggregates and your rubbish coming out of the city, but also we're doing a piece of work around light freight. So the sort of DHLs, the UPSs, the Amazons, how can we move some of that effectively? I'm quite interested on the relationship of passenger vessels and freight. If you think about air freight, a significant amount of air freight is carried in the belly of passenger planes. And I'm quite interested in how does that work on a river? If we're increasing the number of passenger movements on the river, how might those increased passenger movements enable us to increase freight on the river? But I think there are other things that a busy river looks like. So if you imagine you've got a busy river with lots of super clean vessels going up and down, moving people and things, I think there's also something about people being able to access that river. So it's about river frontage. And there we always need to keep that really sensitive balance between people living on the river, people being able to work on the river frontage, and people being able to access it for leisure and just for well-being and health. There's a lovely project which is underway of a Lido, of a Thames Lido. And, I think it's sort of yet to just find its precise home at the moment. But, wouldn't it be nice to see people actually being able to access the water on the river? So I think there's all sorts of ways that we see the river as being pivotal to growth on the estuary. But as I say, it's not just pivotal in any old way, it's got to be pivotal in a clean way.
And you talk about unlocking creative spirit, and talk about the UK's largest concentration of creative production. And I thought some people might be surprised to see the estuary as a creative area. Maybe they look at it more as logistics. I mean, what sort of activities do you see taking place in the estuary of the future?
Yeah, we've got it is an unbelievably creative estuary, from sort of High House through to Medway's current bid for City of Culture. We've got some great stuff. There are great artists, some wonderful festivals. You've got the Estuary Festival, which we just had in May of this year. But I think there's two particular lenses that we're particularly interested in terms of that culture and creativity. And the first one is around kind of film, digital, creative industries, and that as an opportunity both for the expansion of London creative industries outwards to the estuary, but also inward investment. One of the things that we're looking at the moment is the sort of how do we make sure that the estuary is promoted as a destination for film as well, and that's something that we're actively looking at. I think the other thing to say about that is that it's very important for us to look at skills. And I've touched on skills a little bit with Freeport, but I think that we are very committed to the employer-led skills agenda. And if you look at the work that the GLA have done, which we've partnered in, which is around this concept of the production corridor and the creative estuary, there is an enormous skills requirement in there. To deliver the potential of the production corridor, we know we've got to deliver skills. And so we are talking with the production corridor and working with them and with government to look at how we might have an employer-led skills initiative. And by that, this is going to sound really simple, but it would be very difficult to deliver. A skills commissioning body which would secure skills funding from government, which wouldn't directly go to a college, it would go to an employer-led body who would then commission out the skills for the production corridor. It's very difficult to break that relationship of funding between the government and funding educational and skills institutions, but we are quite interested in piloting some new thinking in skills around the production corridor. And the other thing to say, and I sort of would say this, wouldn't I, because it's another hat that I wear, but we're moving into the delivery of the Arts Council's Let's Create new strategy. Obviously, that was published last year and there's been a delay in delivery because of COVID. But I think the Arts Council strategy, which very, very clearly talks about inclusivity and about the ability for all communities to engage and be involved in the Let's Create agenda, is a really interesting one. And we'll be working closely with the Arts Council to make sure that we help with the delivery of that strategy across the estuary as well. I think that's a real opportunity, not just in that kind of levelling up kind of community creativity piece, but also in its sort of international reach and with some of the great institutions and organisations that the Arts Council works with there as well. So I think lots of opportunity there, and for us a really nice opportunity in that skills piece.
Great. Okay, thank you very much for letting me know about what's happening in the estuary, and I look forward to you really developing this whole project, which has taken such a long time to get going. So let's hope now's the time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much indeed. That was lovely. Thank you.